Happy New Year to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Eddie McBride. I'm the President and CEO of the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce, and so glad to have an opportunity to talk about something that's of utmost importance to all of our small businesses and our businesses in Lubbock. We know that some of you that are joining us today got a lot of questions about the recently passed stimulus package to assist individuals and small businesses that are still being impacted by COVID-19. So we ask that you submit those questions in the Q&A portion of our presentation today, not the chat portion, but the Q&A portion, so that at the end of the presentation, I'll make sure that Mr. Bradley has an opportunity to address those. So the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce, speaking of Mr. Bradley, the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce is a proud member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and extremely proud to have him with us to partner with us today. I also want to congratulate Neil, and Neil also passed to Tom and the rest of your team. What a great job that y'all did with the State of the American Business presentation today. And as you stated in your panel, when you started immediately following Tom's address, we have a lot of work to do. Help me welcome Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Neil has spent 2 decades working directly with congressional committee chairpersons and other high-ranking policymakers to achieve solutions. At the Chamber, Bradley is responsible for aligning the organization's overall policy priorities and advocacy efforts. We're very fortunate to have the time to spend with Neil. So Neil, thank you for joining us, and now I turn it over to you for your presentation.
Well, thank you, Eddie. It is a real honor and pleasure to be with you. We really value our partnership with you and the Lubbock Chamber there, and we're grateful that we can just spend this time together to really talk about the work that we do have to do, because there are a lot of businesses across this country who are really counting on both the advocacy work that you do, that chambers across the country do, that we're fortunate enough to do, but also understanding how they navigate what has turned out to be an incredibly complex environment, including with respect to the pandemic relief packages. And so thanks for everything you're doing. I will say, if it were not for the support of local chambers talking to their members of Congress and stressing the need to get pandemic relief done, the bill that became law 2 days after Christmas would not be law today. And so, the efforts to reach out to lawmakers absolutely has made the difference. And it's what has created the opportunities that exist today with some of these new programs. And so if it's okay, I'm going to pull up and share. Well, maybe I'm pulling up and sharing. It says it's disabled for screen share. Can we enable screen sharing there? Well, if not, we'll just go off these. I really want to start by talking about 2 of the really key programs that were part of this pandemic relief package. And everyone has tended to focus on PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. But I actually want to start with one of the other provisions. It's called the Employee Retention Tax Credit, the ERTC. Here we go. I think we can pull this up now, and we'll. There we are. Eddie, can you see that?
Yes, sir, I can, Neil. Thank you.
All right, fantastic.
Sorry for the delay.
No, that was on me. So looks like we got the technology worked out on my end. So the Employee Retention Tax Credit, the reason I want people to pay attention to this is because it's pretty darn valuable. It's a refundable, advanceable tax credit of up to $14,000 per employee in 2021. You can qualify for this tax credit if you have 500 or fewer employees and that you had more than a 20% decline in gross receipts in the calendar quarter. So in the calendar quarter, for example, that we're currently in compared to 2019. So if you're a small business and your business is off by more than 20%, this is something that is available to you. We tend to think of tax credits as something that, every year when we finally get around to filing our taxes that we can claim. This actually doesn't work this way. This is a tax credit that applies against what you as an employer remit to the Treasury Department for the withholding of payroll taxes for your employees. And it's refundable in the sense that if you're remitting $100, or you would remit $100 in payroll taxes, and the credit that you're eligible for is $200, the IRS actually sends you a check. So that didn't happen very often, but it happens in this instance. The IRS sends you a check. In addition, if cash flow is an issue for your small business, and you say, gosh, I'm not going to remit those taxes, until the end of the quarter, you can actually apply for an advance of the tax credit with the IRS, and the IRS sends you the money ahead of time. People may have remembered looking at this last year. It was originally created as part of the CARES Act. That was that big package last spring. But one of the rules at the time was that you couldn't both take the PPP loan and the employee retention tax credit. And in 2020, the value of the employee retention tax credit was sizably lower. It was only $5,000 per employee. So a lot of small businesses said, nope, I'm going the PPP route. And that was the right route to go. Today, that prohibition about claiming both has been repealed, and you can go look at taking that employee retention tax credit. One question we often get is, how do you get it? This is not like the PPP where you go to your bank or you go to the SBA. This is something that you should talk to your tax accountant, your bookkeeper, whoever helps you do your taxes and remit your payroll taxes. All the application forms are on the IRS website. They're currently being updated to reflect these new figures, but it's a huge opportunity. When you reach out, if you're interested in this, to your tax preparer or your payroll service provider. By the way, if you use an independent payroll service provider, they can help you with this. When you reach out to them, make sure you ask about whether you could claim the credit for some payroll that you paid in 2020. One of the changes that was in the law says that you can look back into 2020 and claim that up to $5,000 per employee credit. Now, it really only applies to employers with fewer than 100 employees for that retrospective look in general, but that's something that's worth taking a look at. Let me quickly get to the second draw PPP loan program. So the new bill reopens the old PPP program. And if you are eligible for a PPP loan, but for some reason didn't get it, you can now go apply for that first PPP loan. But we know a lot of people have exhausted that first PPP loan. They may or may not have applied for forgiveness yet, but all the funds that they got have been utilized and have been spent. So for those small businesses, you're eligible for a second PPP loan that looks a lot like the very first loan. One difference is that the maximum cap of the loan is now $2 million rather than $10 million for first round PPP loans. And the eligibility is slightly different. Businesses are who have fewer than 300 employees. Remember, first draw it's 500. Now this is 300, who've exhausted that loan and experienced more than a 25% decline in gross receipts in a 2020 quarter compared to 2019. Now, a lot of people have gotten tripped up on this quarterly comparison thing. And is it the quarter that we're currently in? Which quarter is it? The law says, and the SBA put out interim final regulations at the end of last week that clarifies that if in any calendar quarter in 2020, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, in any of those quarters, you experienced a decline in gross receipts of more than 25% compared to the same quarter in 2019, you are eligible. If you say, gosh, my business was off way more than 25%, I don't feel like going back and looking at the quarters, you can look at your annual income for 2020 compared to your annual income for 2019. And if it's off by more than 25%, the SBA has said, good enough, you qualify, and you can apply for that second draw loan. Like the first draw loans, these are made through your banks. So you go to a bank, a credit union, a CDFI, one of those lending institutions. A lot of folks ask, do I have to use the same lender? No, the law doesn't require that, nor do the regulations. Though understand that your lender is going to be looking for a lot of the same information that you gave them the first time. So in many instances, it might be easier to go with the same lender because it's a lot of the same information for that program. I'm going to bring up one more slide here because there are two other aspects here. Let's see if we can get to. Here we are. Two other aspects of the law that are worth paying attention to. The first is the targeted EIDL grant. You may remember the EIDL program. This is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. This is the very same loan program administered by the SBA that if there's a tornado, for example, or flooding, and your business is affected, that you can go and apply for this low interest loan. One of the things that was originally created in the CARES Act, that bill from the last spring, was the ability to get a $10,000 grant that you don't have to repay to help your business operations. Congress provided about $20 billion. The money went like that, and there was a lot of people weren't able to get their grant. Congress has re-upped the fund and now has another $20 billion, but priority is being given to certain employers. Those who have 300 or fewer that are located in a census tract that's eligible for the new market tax credit. A lot of folks don't know if they're eligible for the new market tax credit. So one of the things I recommend doing is you can simply Google new market tax credit map. The Department of Housing and Urban Affairs has a map, for example, that when you Google that will likely come up, and you can simply enter your address and see if you're in one of those zip codes. If you are, and you experienced a 30% reduction in gross receipts for any 8-week period between March and the end of the year in 2020, compared to any similar period, the same period in 2019, or maybe if you're a seasonal business right before, you're eligible for this and you have priority for getting that $10,000 grant, which of course doesn't have to be repaid. The last program, and by the way, you go to the SBA for that EIDL grant. The portal is not currently yet up and running on the SBA's website, but we do expect it to be soon. The last program is called the Live Venue Grant Program. This is for music halls, theater companies, independent motion picture theaters, anyone whose business really relies on bringing an audience together to view an event, and that you earn your income from charging people for that event. If you fall into one of those categories, and by the way, in the law, the definition is pretty specific. For example, if you're a theatrical producer, you actually have to have the equipment, the sound management equipment, and the video equipment that normally goes along with that. You actually have to have ticket sales. So a lot of people say, hey, I got a restaurant, I have live music on Friday night. Does that make me a live venue operator? Unfortunately, under the law, it does not. But if this does apply to you, and you've had a 25% reduction in your gross earned income in 2020 compared to 2019, you're eligible for a grant of up to $10 million, or 45% of your 2019 gross earned revenue. So this is something that's more generous than the PPP program. You don't have to pay it back. There are very little restrictions tied to it. You do have to choose between this grant and a PPP loan. You can't choose both, but if you're eligible, this is something that is definitely worth looking at. It will be administered by the Small Business Administration. We're currently waiting for them, and we expect in the next days, maybe a week or so, they will unveil the rules around this program and the application process. And so that's something definitely worth paying attention to if you're eligible. Let me stop there, Eddie, and I know folks have lots of questions, and I'd be happy to take questions that folks might have or expand on any of these programs or any of the other aspects of the law.
You bet. And I'll just go to the Q&A. We've got some questions there for you, Neil. So let me start with the first very good question. Can you get a PPP loan if you don't have any employees? It's just the one individual and their partner.
Yes, you can. So the PPP program, if you are self-employed or you have it's only a partnership, or you're an independent contractor. So let's say you earn a living, you get a 1099 and you do work for lots of other people and they pay you as an independent contractor, you are eligible. Even though you don't have any employees. Now, you still have to meet the same, you have to attest that you've been hurt by the COVID pandemic to get the first round loan. You are still limited to paying to the loan, to applying for the loan in an amount that represents 2.5 months of your average income from your business or from your independent contractor services. And you have to use that money in the same way that you used your income from the business. If you already got that loan and you're also eligible and you've exhausted it, you also are eligible as a self-employed individual, member of a partnership, or an independent contractor for the second draw loan, but you will also have to demonstrate that you've had that 25% reduction in gross receipts in the individual quarter. So if you're self-employed, please do, and you've experienced the impacts of COVID do apply, because this program is for you.
Cool, thank you for that. And I know that you've answered this on other occasions as well, as about how does the PPP loan and even EIDL loans for that matter apply to nonprofits? Yeah,
so let's start with the PPP program. The original Paycheck Protection Program was for-profit businesses and the self-employed that I just talked about, but also for 501c3 organizations. So the C3s are the typical charitable organizations, and they have been eligible since day one. One of the changes that Congress made is that 501c6 organizations, like chambers of commerce, like business associations, destination marketing organizations. I suspect, Eddie, you have one in Lubbock there that helps promote tourism and people come in for conventions and staying in hotels. Those were ineligible under the original program. They are now eligible. They generally have to have 300 employees, not the 500. There are limitations on lobbying expenses, but they're broadly eligible. Slipping over to the EIDL program, nonprofits are also generally eligible for EIDL grants. There was some confusion early on with the SBA about 501c6s. We believe now with the change for PPP that'll be cleared up with respect to C6s for EIDL. But again, we're waiting on final regulations out of the SBA on that front.
Yes, sir. And another question in relation to that: if you apply for the theater grant, can you also apply for EIDL, since you can't do the PPP and the live venue grant?
There is no. You may not be able to. You may not be able to receive the EIDL $10,000 grant, but you can certainly apply for a regular EIDL loan, and so there is no prohibition there on the live venue grant, the regular loan, because the loan, of course, is something that you have to repay.
Gotcha. And a lot of people have asked about the process, obviously, some of the people who have actually had their PPP original loan forgiven had the $10,000 that was not applied to the forgiveness part. And is there a process by which SBA allows the opportunity for you to go back in and apply for the $10,000 that was for the idle grant that was taken out of your PPP forgiveness?
Yes. So, Eddie, what you're referring to is that under the original law, if you got the idle grant and PPP, by the time you went to forgiveness, if you had the $10,000, they took that out of whatever was forgiven from your PPP loan. Congress has repealed that. So now that offset no longer exists. You're exactly right. Some people said, wait, I've already gotten my forgiveness. I've already lost my idle grant. We do anticipate that there will be a process for folks to reconcile that. SBA's got a lot on their plate right now and getting all these things up and running, so we don't have that yet, but we do anticipate at some point that will be the case.
Got it. The new PPP rules talk about a business can use either your 2019 or your 2020 average monthly payroll numbers. Then it asks for the number of employees. However, it's not specific as to which time frame to use, and it simply asks how many employees do you have. Can you talk about this and whether you can use an example like or use average monthly payroll for 19 and the current number of employees in 2020 or 2021? I guess just 2020, right? Or 2021, either one.
So it will. Well, it'll. There. Well, you might be able to capture a little bit of 2021 by using a 12-month look back. Assuming once we get to the end of January, for example. But for practical purposes, we're really talking about your payroll expenses in either 2020 or 2019. You're exactly, the question is exactly right. They're not specific on the form about when your employee headcount. I would tell you, my advice is that whatever you choose to use for your payroll expenses, you're going to want to use the same number for your employee headcount, just because you don't want to be mixing the payroll costs with one set of employees with the number of your number of employees in a different set. So whatever you choose to use, just be consistent across the form.
Yes, sir. This one question asker is saying the community bank has already informed us that they'll be using a third-party vendor for PPP round 2 processing. Is this common? And will there be any adverse effects for those of us requesting PPP funds?
So I've not heard a lot I've not heard a lot about banks using third-party processors. So just like the first PPP, the process is that the SBA opens up this. Everyone calls it a portal, but it's basically an electronic system that accepts submissions from registered users, and the registered users have to be lenders who have, just think about like when you're interfacing with your bank, like you got your own unique ID number. It's the same thing. Lenders have a unique number. They have special access to this portal. I suppose that if a bank is using a third party, they're probably using their access number. I don't know of any reason that wouldn't work, but I think these are good questions to ask when you're talking to your lender, just to make sure, because you certainly don't want to be hung out there and for some reason have it delayed.
And ask it very quickly because the time's going to go fast, I bet. Don't you suggest that March 31st is the deadline? Do you think it's going to go faster than that, most likely?
It's hard to say. March 31st is the deadline. The fact that when the program terminated in August, there was still unused PPP loan authority that small businesses hadn't applied for. So we're not, even though the program has expanded slightly, we're not sure how much demand there's going to be for new first round PPP loans. And the second draw loans, we suspect there's going to be a lot of demand, but they're going to be smaller loans on average because of the new cap. And the number of entities that qualify is a smaller subset. So I'm not especially concerned, but why take a chance?
Yeah, and some more questions a little bit later about the future politics, but let's stick to what we know right now. There is no difference between fiscal and physical quarters. So if somebody has a question about their fiscal year ending October 31st, they still use the comparable comparisons between 19 and 20, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And the one business owner's only been open for a year. Do they qualify if they can't compare quarters because there's nothing to compare to?
So as long as you were in existence and in operation on February 15th, 2020, you qualify. You're exactly right. There are special, so let's assume you were in existence, but you don't have any 2019 quarters to look back to, right? So there are special rules that will allow you to look back to one quarter if you were open, like let's say the fourth quarter of 2019, or if you weren't open any quarter in 2019, to look back to the prior quarter in 2020. Some of the calculations are a bit different. So if that does apply to you, you're going to have to do some special calculations that someone who was in existence, for a full year in 2019 doesn't have to do, but you are still eligible and they've accommodated you in this process.
And get your banker to make sure they help you make the application.
Yeah,
Or whoever your third party is.
Four-step thing, and I apologize. I should be able to walk you through each of the steps, but I don't want to mislead anyone. But what I don't want anyone to do is say, "Oh, I don't qualify." You qualify. Get them to help you figure out which quarter you compare to which quarter.
Gotcha. This is an interesting question. If they didn't receive the first PPP or any idle loan, and then the folks who are going to be receiving their application knows that they haven't received one before, are they going to be more likely to be approved if they meet all the qualifications, or are they just in the queue like everybody else according to the application process?
So Congress has set aside, I think it's about $25 billion for first-time PPP recipients. If you didn't get a PPP loan the first time, there is money set aside to make sure that at least some of those are addressed. We don't know if 25 billion will be enough. We don't know if it'll be more than that, but the Congress has set that aside. There's not a similar set aside on the EIDL grants, other than what I mentioned for those fewer than 300 in the new market tax credit zip codes, and with the 8 weeks of gross income reduction. There are also some set asides for CDFIs. In fact, the current portal is open. It opened on Monday, but it's only open for essentially CDFIs, community development financial institutions, to process loans. Tomorrow, it will open for CDFIs for second draw PPP loans. And we expect at some point next week, the program will open more broadly, but there will also be set-asides for small banks with less than $10 billion in assets and credit unions with less than $10 billion in assets. So if you have a really small credit union or bank that is locally owned, doesn't have a lot of branches right there in Lubbock, and they participate in the program, there's a set-aside for them to make sure that their clients get loans.
Thank you for that. The loan debt forgiveness states that hard-hit industries such as hotels will receive an additional 8 months of payments for their 7A loans. Do you know when this will begin? And if they receive the initial 6 payments, then will they receive an additional 8?
Yes. So what they're referencing is one of the provisions of the CARES Act essentially provided initially up to 6 months of where the government was making the payments on your SBA loans, namely 7A loans, but there were also some micro loans and a few other SBA products that were covered in that. Congress has extended that. For most everyone, it's generally an additional 3 months on top of your original 6. But if you happen to be in one of those hard-hit industries, which includes lodging, hospitality, restaurants, it's up to that additional amount that the questioner asked about. And so this will be tacked on top of it. And so the SBA should be providing some information shortly about how folks make sure they continue that. It's not, forbearance is the wrong word because you don't have to pay it back. It's they're assuming your payments for you. And so that's coming.
Another question, we're a corporation with 3 employees plus 1 owner, officer, and employee. Is there a dollar limit on the owner officer salary draw?
$100,000 annual. And so that's obviously prorated for 2.5 months, which is the loan size, unless you are in that hospitality or the restaurant or lodging industries, accommodations and restaurants. If you're in that industry, you can borrow up to 3.5 months, but the $100,000 pro rata still applies. So you can't claim 3.5 months of a $200,000 salary.
And I think you addressed some of this, but I don't know if this specific question you addressed. How do you maximize the 10,000 grant EIDL? They only received 1,000 due to the SBA conditioning for the original grant amount. So how can they go back and get the rest of what they did not
so get? If you're in if you're described that less than 300 in that new market tax credit eligible zip code, that 8-week loss, they are prioritizing giving you your additional remainder EIDL grant. And so they've reserved funding and priority to make sure that if you only got $1,000, you get the extra 9,000. If you don't meet that criteria, let's say you're not in one of those zip codes, for example, you may still be able to get that difference, but it's unclear what's clear to us is that you don't have priority, and so it's going to be an issue of when the SBA runs out of funds.
Got it. Thank you. And I know the SBA has already issued guidelines for the PPP and the second draw, and I think obviously most folks that are paying attention, and also the employee retention tax credit. But you mentioned earlier that the EIDL grant application portal has not been open yet. Do you have any idea when that might be available?
Unless it's open, I should clarify. It could have opened today, and I didn't see it. But as of when I checked, yesterday, it wasn't. I suspect soon.
Okay. Yeah. And I know that everybody's just waiting. And if some of the banks, I've heard that some of the banks have been contacted already for either the PPP loan that was supposed to have application yesterday, or even the second draw that's supposed to open tomorrow. What happens if some of the banks aren't ready, and what would you recommend businesses do? Just wait on the banks? Is there anything else they can do to get the application process started?
Yeah, so to be clear, at the moment, it is not open for regular banks. The process is only open for those community development financial institutions. It is going to open, I suspect, early next week. They have not announced it, but my suspicion is early next week. It will open more broadly. And so you're going to want your lending institution to be ready to make that application. I would check with them, it is when they're going to be ready. I do not anticipate that this is going to be like the initial round of PPP where the money's exhausted in a mere days, just given the new limitations on the loans that I mentioned before. But if they're telling you they don't know when they're going to be ready, I might be trying to find someone who can at least tell you with certainty when they're going to be ready.
I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you. If you cannot apply for the PPP when you try for the live venue grant, how long do we expect to have guidelines and applications open for the live venue grant? And of course, their worry is about missing out on the funding since it went so fast last time.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's going to go so fast that you risk missing out. One of the things I do think in a matter of days we'll have the live venue. There's nothing in the PPP regulations, and I suspect there will not be in the live venue, that prevents you from trying to pursue both. You just can't take both. So you may be in a situation in which you say, gosh, I'm worried I'm not going to get one or the other. I'm going to apply, and then I'm going to make a decision about which one to take. And that's a reasonable kind of approach to take. The one thing I'd warn people about is you may find out about one before you find out about the other, and there's, you're going to have to make a decision, pretty quickly. So the way I've advised people, my decision tree is start by really making sure that you understand that you're going to be eligible for that live venue grant. And if you're confident that you are, and you think it's going to be substantially more valuable to you than the PPP, then that's what you might want to prioritize. But you're going to have to do some calculations to figure out if that's true. You're going to have to compare your gross receipts. You're going to have to compare that to what you can have forgiven under PPP, and figure out which is actually more valuable.
Gotcha. Thank you. Good question here. Can we qualify to get a PPP loan if we're an S Corp and it's just 2 of us and no employees? And the follow-on question, can we use it to get compensation and paid bills, because they're a nightclub, but they've been closed since March of 2020. So there's a need there, obviously.
Yeah. So in general, you should be able to. Remember, your PPP loan is still going to be based on on compensation that was, in this instance, paid to the owner. And so there will be that limitation on the amount of your loan. Your uses of the loan will continue to be, you still have to use 60% of it for compensation to the owner employee here, in that regard. If you don't use it for those purposes, it'll remain a loan that you have to pay back.
The back to the EIDL grants, economic injury disaster loans. Several questions about EIDL in general. Economic injury disaster loans are separate from the PPP. So obviously it's a separate application, separate process, not a forgiveness part. For those who might not have known about the EIDL and the EIDL process, can you just speak to that real quick about what all it consists of?
Yeah, so it's a program that's operated by the Small Business Administration. You don't go to your local bank, you go to the Small Business Administration. It is a 30-year low interest loan that's based on certain of your operating expenses as a small business. For smaller loans, they've removed some of the requirements that normally exist, that, for example, you had to seek credit elsewhere, or and you don't have to demonstrate that now for the smaller loans. I mentioned that the EIDL grant is not available, but the normal EIDL loan application process, last time I checked a couple of days ago, was up and operating on the SBA's website. They're going to have to, and so you may want to go ahead and get that, download it, but remember, you do that all through the SBA.
And with the change of administration, and we know that the potential after this round is done, what do you forecast is the potential future going forward of another round between the Congress and the administration?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say at the moment. I think part of it, President-elect Biden has talked about another major stimulus package. Senator Schumer, who on the 20th will become the majority leader, but the majority leader in a 50-50 Senate. So the margin doesn't get any tighter than that. He's talking about pursuing, another stimulus round. But in reality, I think they're focused on things that weren't included in the last bill. It's not clear how much bipartisan support those are going to have. Even some Democrats are objecting to some of the things, like the $2,000 checks, round of those. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see how the current bill plays out over the next month or 2 months. we're going to get into March and we're going to see where we are with the economy, where we are with the pandemic, and that's what's going to drive another potential round from Congress.
And I forgot to tell all the listeners, all the people who are participating, we posted the link to the U.S. Chamber website that has the perfect small guide for that, a small business guide. So a lot of the questions, some questions, where do you go to get the applications? It's all linked to the SBA site that you can get from yours. And we will also, at the end of the conversation today, post our website where the information's repeated that we got from y'all. So that information will be available, and contact us here at the Chamber anytime for folks who are listening. The employee retention tax credit seems like a pretty good deal, as you said, but there are concerns that tax credits could be reversed in the future with the new Congress and administration. Is there any fear of that whatsoever?
No, I have zero fear of that. And this happens to be a pretty bipartisan proposal. So it's got a lot of Democrat and Republican support. So I don't think it gets reversed. I'm also not sure it gets extended, by the way. So this is for Q1 of the proposal I described applies where you can get up to $14,000. That's $7,000 per employee in Q1 and another $7,000 in calendar Q2. And then under the law, it expires. I don't know if Congress is going to extend it or not. I wouldn't necessarily count on that, but it is something that I think is worth taking advantage of in Q1 and Q2. Let me also say one aspect of it that is worth noting to pay attention to. I mentioned that the prohibition about getting a PPP and the tax credit has been repealed. However, it does remain the case that you can't pay for the same salary expenses with both a PPP loan and the employee retention tax credit. So think of it this way. If you have $1 in payroll costs, you can't get both $1 from the PPP program and $1 from the tax credit to pay for the same payroll costs. But we know you're going to exhaust your PPP, or you may not use all the employee retention tax credit. So you can use both of them. Just make sure that you're using them at the right time for different payroll expenses.
That's good. Thank you for that. Running out of questions, so I know we're exhausting you, so this is great. I got another question about the second draw PPP loan. The forgiveness, we know it says it's going to be forgivable. Is the process going to be similar to the first forgiveness process?
Yes, we expect it to be very identical, really, to the first forgiveness. And this is a good opportunity to raise some good news if you got less than $150,000 loan. If you have less than $150,000, Congress has mandated that it is a one-page application, in paper or online, that all that documentation that you were supposed to gather up in the long forms, anything less than $150,000, you don't have to do that. It's simple one page, a simple attestation that you comply with the rules. It's also worth mentioning, because I know a lot of people have been concerned about the tax implications. If you may remember, last year, the IRS said that yes, having your loan forgiven isn't taxable income, but you can't deduct the business expenses that you paid for with a PPP loan. Congress overruled the IRS, and now there are no tax implications from getting a PPP loan and having it forgiven. So there was a lot of concern. People were talking to their tax accountants and learning that they were going to have a big tax bill. That's been wiped out. You don't have to worry about that as a result of your PPP loan.
Good, thank you. Good question about vacation rental properties like an Airbnb, which have been empty because of obviously travel restrictions, and how can they qualify for a program with not having any employees to be able to get some of the PPP?
It's really tough. You're not going to qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program. Obviously, you're not the live venues. It's I think the only thing you might be able to is if you actually operate it as a business and have business income, you might be able to get one of those idle loans, but it would be a loan. It wouldn't be you're not going to qualify for a grant. You're not going to qualify for one of the forgivable loans.
Thank you. On the Stages grant, is it all income or just ticket sales that determines your 45%?
I'm sorry, on the
Live venue grant.
Oh, on the live venue, it's your gross earned income. So which is a little bit gross earned receipts, excuse me, which is generally a little bit different than gross receipts. Gross receipts are usually encompassing of everything that you have kind of incoming. Gross earned receipts can be different. Again, this is an area where just like the SBA spelled out the definition of gross receipts for PPP, we expect that they will spell out exactly what they mean by gross earned receipts when they issue that guidance.
Well, that's pretty good. We got one last question. Can we qualify to get a PPP if we are an S corp? I'm sorry, it must have got repeated. I apologize. I've already asked.
No worries.
But I did get one thing I want you to know, that here we are in West Texas, and thank you for talking to all of us out in Lubbock, of course. But we have one listener, comment that says, superb presentation, crystal clear answers. Thank you from New Hampshire. I think that's somewhere east of the Red River, I think on the other side of Oklahoma too, I believe.
It's a little farther than even my home state of Oklahoma. So,
but it's great that we drew a crowd from that far of a reach, and I can certainly say that, Neil, you've proven time and time again that not only are you an expert in these affairs, but you're able to communicate with us very clearly. Thank you so much for taking the time today and the answers. And we also thank all the attendees who submitted all the questions, a lot of really good questions. And again, we've recorded today's presentation, and we're going to put it on our COVID-19 resources page that we just posted in the chat room, so everybody can go and get a copy of the recording as well. And we've been on Facebook Live as well, just to expanded the reach beyond just of our Zoom audience. So we'll continue to update our COVID-19 resources page, and again, and just utilize U.S. Chamber resources as much as we can, because obviously y'all have done such a great job on answering all. So Neil, on behalf of the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce, our member and the businesses that we represent, thank you personally for all that you've done, and pass my best, of course, to all the U.S. Chamber team, and including Sarah, if you'll let her know that I personally said hello to Sarah.
I will, absolutely. Thank you, Eddie. Thanks for everything you do.
And thank all of y'all for attending. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us here at the Lubbock Chamber. Neil, have a great one. Thank you very much.
You too. Bye-bye. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, sir.